So before we introduce our panel, I want to introduce Freeman Blade. Coach Blade is one of our most experienced trainers. He delivers this critically important programming to our student athletes. He does it in a way that is incredible. I have been to a couple of coaches' sessions, and they are amazing, and I highly encourage you to do the same with any of our trainers if you ever get a chance. So before Coach Blade talks, we've got a quick video. Take a look at your monitors and the board, and then we'll hand it over to Coach Blade. Thank you.
These are more than athletic venues. They're classrooms, places that shape our children's character, where kids learn how to win in sports and in life. Here, sports teach. Visit positivecoach.org to learn how you can help support our mission of developing better athletes and better people.
Let me thank you all for coming again, as Neil already has. When we talk about Positive Coaching Alliance, I'd like to just say to you that it became for me, when I met our founder, owner, Jim Thompson, more than just a program. Because what he mentioned was, this is a movement. When Neil talked about transformation, it's moving from one place to another. And what we try to do with PCA is when we're talking with our kids, we deal with them in moving from the inside out. We talk to athletic directors, coaches, parents, athletes about dealing with your kids. And you can do it as administrators, as CEOs, as people who run your organization. Move people from the inside out. That's what we call in our emotional intelligence. We talk a lot about the emotional tank with PCA. So before we get rolling real quick, I want to give an example. I want you to turn to somebody real quickly, and in terms of their emotion, I want you to say to them a bunch of negative stuff. Yeah, because we have to deal with coaches and parents and others. I want you to turn to that person, just say anything for about 5 seconds that's just negative. Here's an example. David, I'm getting ready to load up on you. David, that sucked. That was crazy. It was not something that I wanted you to do. You already know what's going on. And I see David's eyes going. But coach. Yeah. And sometimes that happens with us. But when you're dealing with kids, our job is to develop the spirit, the soul, and the body of our kids. So here's the second piece that I want to give to you. Okay, David, great job, son. I like the way you went to the bucket. I'm into basketball. I like the way you went to the bucket. Now here, when you want to finish, go into the glass, use your left hand on the left side. You with me? Now I need you to go back and take care of your business. You with me? Yeah, he's smiling. There's a difference in the effect of the emotion and the spirit of your kids or even your employees at work. When you touch their spirit and you develop their soul. And that's where we are with PCA. We want to move, we want to transform youth sports from being ugly in terms of negative stuff to being more positive in the development of our kids, yeah? So that they can become the people that we're trying to make the change for. They become. So we start with the youth. Thank you. I appreciate you guys coming out. Let's think about it with PCA. Thank you very much. Neil?
Thank you, Freeman. That was fantastic. And we have a lot of great trainers. Freeman is amazing. Pam Malone's back here as well from Chagrin Falls. We've got several others around the country and in Cleveland who do an amazing job every day, every week. 7 in the morning at a local high school before they have to go to the rest of their day. They do it because they know it works. So much appreciated for everything you guys do. So we're really excited to have a great panel today. Al Pawlowski from Fox is here. He'll introduce our panel. Incredibly knowledgeable people who work in the Indians organization, who do things that both help us develop players, work to win the World Series, and also do it right. And everything that they do is incredibly, there's a huge overlap to what they do, to what you do as parents, coaches, athletic directors, referees, you name it, with your kids. There is a very significant overlap, and I think you'll be surprised to hear how you can both strive to win and also do it right at the same time. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to Al.
Okay, Neil, thanks a lot, and thanks to everybody for coming out here today. It's great to see you at the ballpark. Gorgeous day. We could play baseball today and, have a good time out there, right? With the way the weather's nice, no rain, no snow like we had early in the season. But great to see you all here. So here's our panel that we have for you. First up, Alex Eckelman from Player Development with the Cleveland Indians. And Alex, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got with the Tribe.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Alex Eckelman. Along with Matt, we are assistant directors of player development. So working with our players in the minor leagues as far as player programming, different systems, player plans. So kind of overseeing that. I remember attending one of these a few years back. So it was Tito was up here. He didn't need a name tag. He just said, "Hey, I'm Tito," and basically passed the mic along. So I'm looking forward to, so I do dual role because I'm a parent as well of two young kids who are in sports also. And so looking at it from both sides, I see, everything from what we do on our level and then carries on over down there. And there's so many similarities. Yes, there are differences, but there's so many similarities, it's unbelievable. But again, really greatly appreciate this opportunity. We're just trying to learn and grow within the scope of this community as well.
All right. Matt, you're next up. Matt Blake, also from Player Development here with the Tribe.
How you doing, guys? So this is my 4th year with the Tribe. Co-partner with Eck here on player development, focusing more on the pitching side. Before I got to the Indians, I was running a private pitching instruction business for about 7 years and coaching high school baseball and helping run a travel baseball organization. So probably can relate to a lot of the challenges you guys are going through and teaching some of your athletes and helping sort through some of the information that's out there. But yeah, so Eck and I basically overlap in the player development side, and with his more being position player specific and mine more on the pitching side.
All right, very good. And Lou Carlin from Lake County, a manager there, and he also had to work with Jensen Lewis as a catcher, which I have to do on a regular basis on my show. So, Luke, I have a lot of empathy and sympathy for you both.
The feelings are shared for sure. We could spend all day talking about Jensen stories, but yeah. So, managed Lake County Captains just down the road. Had the privilege to play for 14 years. 3, 4, 5, jumping around between Columbus and then a few games here with the Indians in 2010 and 2012. Knew I wanted to get into coaching afterwards, was fortunate enough, loved the Indians and find the right fit here. And kind of a dual role, like Alex was saying, we call him Eck, so from here on out you'll hear me call him Eck. Have 2 girls that are in youth sports as well, so unique challenges, trying to find the right coaching, what's the right fit, and then obviously as a parent with the dual goal of we're trying to nurture their hearts first and foremost. So excited to be here for this opportunity, and hopefully we can all learn and grow together.
All right, fellas. So let's start off by talking about communication. Coach Blade was talking about that too, and how it's changed over the years and how it changes from level to level. Because I think we've all had some involvement, recreational level through high school. You guys go through college and then the pros. But how has communication from a coach to a player changed over the years, and changed from where you start out at that recreation level and then go much higher up? Alex, we'll start off with you.
Sure. Clearly, we all know that the means of communication are far different. I don't think anybody's going to change that with young kids and kids in general, even kids that are at the professional level. And so finding ways to communicate at their level, I think, is hugely important. If you're trying to combat it, usually doesn't work out very well. Our philosophy from our organization is, and you'll hear us talk about this a lot in development, is partner with the player. And so we want to make sure we sit at the same side of the table with the player, bring information to them, be a resource to them, and then also tie in, okay, what are your goals? What are your aspirations? What are the things that you feel like you want to focus on? Because the ultimate name of the game, no matter what level you're talking about, is bringing passion to the players. If the players are engaged, if they're passionate about what they're doing, I mean, they're going to be all in. Yeah, and you bring information to them in that regard. We have way more information than we did in previous years. Sometimes we need to filter that information because there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. But just meeting them where they're at whatever level, just to continue to kind of stoke those flames.
Matt, you talk about filling up the tank, the emotional tank, with positiveness and building up players. Maybe not necessarily coaching to the scoreboard, as the book says, but focusing on development. How are some ways that you can go about that?
Yeah, so from the pitching side of it, the ways we try and focus with our guys in particular, and depending on what level of information you have available to you, we try and focus a lot more on just like the process of becoming a good player. It's easy to look at the scoreboard and see that you threw 5 innings and had no runs and feel good about it, but it's harder if it's 5 innings and 5 runs or 5 innings and 6 runs, and try and keep guys like attuned to the development process of things they're supposed to be working on that we think are the highest leverage things for them to become a major league version of themselves. So one of the things we always try and find is like, what are the things that you can control that are like in your power to become better at through your training. So we try and stay like really clear about the things that they can impact and the things that they can take care of in their daily work, and try not to let the conversation deviate away from that as much as possible, and then recognizing that all these guys are human and have other people speaking to them from other areas, that you're going to have to navigate some of those things as you go. But yeah, the more we can kind of keep it on like our principles of development and fostering the process more than just the outcome, kind of helps us kind of navigate that a little bit more.
Luke, as a player, you made it all the way to the major leagues. Now you're back as a manager and as a coach with almost kids. You're kind of the bridge, kids that are coming out of college or high school, getting their first aspects of pro ball. Coaching tactics, how do you kind of balance that of taking a kid who was an amateur, now this kid's becoming a professional?
Yeah, I think we could talk about communication for 3 hours. I mean, it's such a wide spectrum. Your first little bit about how's it changed. I think all of us in this room are probably old enough to know that it's gone a lot or from very directive to following interests. And I think if, like Coach Blade was up here talking about emotional intelligence, I think we see more of that and need more of that now with this generation than maybe before. I think understanding how the player wants to be coached is really important. So in communication, we can think of it on a spectrum of language that we would use. So if we're talking about tactics, if you wanted to communicate on a spectrum from all the way on the left side, from following interest, to all the way on the right side, being very directive as far as telling the person what to do, I think one of the tactics that we like to use is kind of like knock on the door before you can start teaching. So I think there was a part in the book too where it kind of talked about the sandwich, where it was positive, hey, encouragement, these are some areas that you can work on, and positive. I think I like to use it in you coach, teach, coach. And there's a difference between coaching and teaching. Coaching is to create self-awareness. It's a lot of following interests, asking questions, floating ideas. It's a partnership that Eck was talking about with the player. Teaching is raising the level of knowledge. So it's a little bit more directive. I mean, we can't coach somebody to 2 + 2 = 4. You're going to have to teach them that. And so we need to understand when those teaching moments are and when those coaching moments are. And I think the first tactic that we would use is knock, coach first. And that's usually by asking a question. That's usually, and there's some really cool stuff in the PCA book when it talks about that. And they blend it with teaching, but it's really important to understand what type of language we're using and what our goal is with using that language. What purpose are we trying to get across here? Are we trying to create more self-awareness, or do we need to bring up the level of knowledge of the player? And so I think it's really important as coaches that, one, we get the training in that, we understand how we're impacting the players from a physical skill acquisition standpoint, but as the dual goal, more importantly, as the emotional intelligence side of things. So I think finding the timing and earning the trust of the player is probably the first and foremost thing. It's, I mean, we could talk forever, and I'm rambling just a little bit, but it's the player is going to say, can I trust you, and are you good at what you do? Are you going to help me get better? Do I trust you? Are you going to help me? And I think that level, whether it's youth or professional, I think that they're asking themselves that to some degree, no matter which way we look at it.
I think that's a great way to put it too, Luke. And you talked about, can your student basically, can they trust you? And that's a lot of what your players are, really your students. We've got a lot of folks out here today that are high school coaches. We have parents that are out there today. So to all you guys, really, what does that good coaching look like? I think a lot of us as parents see our kids on the field or on the court or on the hockey rink, and we look at it and we say, okay, I think that's a good coach, or I think that looks how it's supposed to look. But what does it really look like? You guys have been so involved with all this. What is good coaching?
I think Luke handles it well. If you ever get a chance to watch him, especially in pregame, and he mentioned it in his answer right there about asking questions, but it's about getting to know the player. Getting to know, preparing for those conversations ahead of time, understanding, hey, what he's passionate about. I mean, that might be something completely off the field, but understanding who that person is first, so that you can connect at whatever level, open the door, and then ask him questions. And we try to do that quite a bit. Luke does that quite a bit, and then you get to know the player, and then you build that relationship. So when things do happen in the game or things do happen in training, you're giving him options. You're not telling him, hey, what to do. I mean, you can continue to tell him what to do, as he goes his career and he hits the next coach, and that next coach is going to have to tell him what to do, and the next coach is as well. But giving him options, so you're making sure that, hey, he's engaged in the process, he's learning from the situation, and then moving forward from there.
So when you guys are looking to hire a coach from an administrative perspective, what are you looking for in a coach when you're going to put him, for any sport really, but more specifically, I guess, baseball with you guys in the Tribe?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're always evaluating is we have a very strong culture here that's at the forefront of a lot of the conversations we have about where we want to go with the development of our players. So when we start thinking about coaches, they have to start there and think about, do they fit the culture we're looking to build? Not so much do they have the coaching capacity of, do they understand the tech? Do they understand the data? Do they have certain coaching techniques that we really value? Have they coached good players? It's more like, are they willing to learn? Are they willing to grow? I think if we get good people that are open to do new ideas and they come to our environment, we've got a pretty good chance of having success. Now, obviously, the more skills they have along with an open mind and a growth mindset, the easier it is to integrate them. But I think if we have a framework in place to kind of help educate them along the lines of what we think a good baseball player looks like and some of the tools to get them there, but also they need to be willing to grow with us as we start to learn new ways to coach.
And then Luke, making that transition from a player to a coach, and then taking all this information that you have. We have so much information nowadays compared to what we had just a few years ago. How do you take all of that? You take what the organization's looking for. They've now hired you as a manager. How do you take that? How do you use the fundamentals you've learned through the PCA, and then have that in that professional setting and take all that info?
Yeah, it's a lot. I would say that when hiring a coach, and I'll answer it this way, especially for our youth, I think we need to understand that just because we played baseball or you've graduated from 7th grade doesn't mean that you can go teach 7th grade now. Just because I've played in the major leagues does not make me fit to be a coach, to coach Major League Baseball. I think it's really important to have that perspective. I think when we look at, and it's been a continuing, one of the things that Matt was talking about, our culture, we're a learning culture. So I've had to learn a lot taking off the cleats and putting on the turfs to be a coach. So, and I still have a long way to go. I think all of us would say we still have a long way to go. But when you're looking for hiring a coach, if you've got your youth or whatever, I think there's a couple things that parallel really well. If you've been around any good teachers or you've had good teachers, try to make some of the comparisons. And I think that there's some really interesting research out there. I forget where I'd have to look, but it's not necessarily like, depending on the level of your student or your youth, I think really matters. Here's what I was going to say is that, you know, if you're in college, I think the research is in college or in high school, it's, you know, the ones that have really created change, that have made a difference in the lives of the students didn't necessarily like them very much. Where the ones where they would say, wow, I really love this teacher, this professor, they didn't actually learn as much as they might or they should have. I think if you take that story and you parallel it with, you know, I have a 13-year-old, I don't really care how much she learns about volleyball. I want her to have fun and enjoy going to practice and, you know, grow the love of the game, which is what PCA talks about a lot. So I think it really depends on, you know, where your youth is at and identifying like what's the most important thing for them at that time. Obviously, at our level, it's a lot different. If you don't love baseball, you probably won't be here very long. We need very skilled, competent coaches that need to know. They have to be technical experts to a certain degree and be able to build trust. I think some of the things that you could look for when you're hiring coaches or whether it's private instructors or whatever at the youth level, I think is, do they look prepared? Are they prepared for their stuff? I think that's really important. A lot of, I live in Dallas in the off season and private lessons are like a huge thing there, which just blows my mind how much people pay for private lessons and stuff for whether it's baseball or soccer or whatever it may be. But then we'll show up and then you'll see that they're not really prepared. They've either coached in college or whatever. And then they're very direct. They're very directive. And we were talking about that scale. So if they're just like, do this, do this, do this, that should raise some really like huge red flags for you. If they are extremely directive, I would have a huge issue with that. I think where, as I was reading through the PCA stuff, I think Joe Ehrman was maybe on the board of directors. And he has a book, and I think we alluded to it earlier maybe, I think it's called Inside Out Coaching. And that if, a fantastic book, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. But it talks about speaking to the person first. So the inside out is you speak to the heart before you speak to the head. I would look for that if you're looking at youth. Like, can they connect with the person on an emotional level first, and then on the intellectual, you know, technical level second? Those are some of the things that kind of all over the place, but that's some of the things I would look for.
Very good.
To add one more thing on that, I think when we look at coaches and hiring process, it's very similar to, and we've talked about culture a couple times, about what we expect out of ourselves, what we expect of our coaches, and it goes to the same thing with our players. And so if you've heard many Indians employees talk in the player development in the front office, we talk about grit. We talk about grit framework, which is talking about a lot of the same things that are in the book. Growth, having a growth mindset is the G, routine oriented, being prepared, individual mechanics, and team first approach. And so when we're looking at coaches, and then the grit overall, that resiliency. When we're looking at coaches, we're looking for those. And so you will see us hire a wide range, people with plenty of experience like Luke, and then people who have coached, never played professionally, have coached in college for a couple years, but they have that mindset of, hey, they're exploring, they're passionate about what they're doing, they're really prepared, they're teachers first, and trying to grow and learn and continue to improve themselves to make the organization better. And so when our scouts are looking for players, they're looking at the same type of traits.
You know, one of the things that PCA really focuses on is the evidence-based approach, and that there's evidence out there now. It's not simply, you know, you just look at this guy and you think, okay, I think he's going to be a good coach, or I think she's going to be a good coach. When it comes to the evidence-based research with PCA, what separates that from other theories of coaching and training? Matt, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'd say from our end, it makes our job easier. Now, obviously, getting the information is probably the hardest part, like having a consistent source of data or information that you trust and is reliable. Like that's probably half the battle for us, is making sure that we're using reliable information when we go to a player. But I think from an administrative point of view, when like helping oversee our player plans for, from rookie ball when they first enter all the way up to the major leagues, it gives us a centralized place to have a conversation regardless of what level they're at. So it's not our low A pitching coach having one idea about a player and then our high A pitching coach having another idea about a player. We stick to our platform of like what we think a successful major leaguer looks like, and then along the way we can hold them accountable to certain processes or certain things along their development line. And then by sitting down with a player and partnering with them, we've agreed on what we think is important together, and then we use the objective information to have that conversation. So it's not me saying, I don't think you're actually living up to what we agreed upon. The information's telling the story, and then we're just making sure we both see the same thing.
So then, Luke, how does that evidence change the tactics for coaching pitching or coaching hitting? Where 30 years ago it might be just take more batting practice if you're in a slump. There's different ways to go about that now. How has that changed?
Yeah. So, and it's funny because there's definitely language that helps grow the skill when we have the data, when we have the evidence. And I think it's really important to understand that those following interests versus directive and partnering with the player and how you use your language with the evidence that we've provided or that we have can really create change. And here's where I would go. So at the youth level, you guys usually don't have as much data or tech or information maybe readily available. And so I think what's really important to just bring out in the open as a coach or a teacher is say, hey, you know what, we're willing to take a bullet for this, or maybe we're not. And I think when you look at maybe movement or some type of skill that is pleasing to the eye for you because you've seen it on TV or you've been coached that way or something, I think it's really, we just need to pause at that moment and say, okay, you know what, am I willing to take a bullet for this? Because the more data that we find, the more we realize there's not a whole lot that we would take a bullet for. Like, hey, you've got to have your hands high if you're hitting, or, you have to bring your hands over your head like Nolan Ryan if you're a pitcher. Like, that stuff doesn't matter. And when you have the data, it really gets down to, okay, these are some things that we really, over the course of however many pitches, our data can say, like, this actually plays at the highest level. This, maybe not as much. And so when you have a conversation with the player about some of these things, you can follow interests, and then you can say, hey, guess what? Hitting the ball or throwing 75 miles an hour in AAA isn't going to work. Like, we need to throw the ball 93. That would be one simple example. What can we do with you that's going to help you throw the ball harder, or whatever the case may be? So I think it's good to have that data, and then as a coach, really at the amateur level, I would just pause and really say, how confident am I with what I'm teaching right now? And do I maybe need to follow their interests a little bit, or do I need to be more directive and say, no, this is it?
The other interesting aspect is, too, especially for a lot of the folks in the room, they're going to coach players, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, not so much at the professional level because they're all pros, they're all great, but you're going to have kids of different levels, kids that are, further behind, kids that are more advanced. How do you reach each one of those kids and yet stay within the team concept and keep it positive for everybody?
Yeah, that's we were just talking about it about 30 minutes ago, Luke and I, even with our players, so we have different levels, obviously affiliate levels, and then different level players at those affiliates. Some guys are stronger at this or that, and how do you coach that? It's such a wide range of players at where they're at in their development process. And so what we've tried to talk about is meeting them where they're at. So you might, and Luke mentioned earlier about this, you might meet a player who does not have very good self-awareness yet. He does not know the movements yet, and you may have to pull that guy out of competition, really focus on those movements before you can reintroduce a challenge of some sort. You know, get it closer to game speed and build him along. There might be another player who he's ready to jump right into competition and compete. And so meeting them we talk about a funnel of variability as far as, okay, how much variable are we going to add to that player's complexity of his training? Is he ready for just complete over challenge, or do we need to scale that variability back, you know, for that player to learn and develop, and then start adding a little bit more complexity as we go?
Hey, Matt, how do you have those conversations sometimes with both the player and then sometimes the parents?
Yeah, one of the things, so going back to when I was like basically coaching high school or running my pitching instruction business, is obviously at that point you would have parents paying for their player to get better. So you are held to a certain standard of, I have accepted money and am looking to make this player better than when he started. I think sometimes the challenge is not every player is going to get better. So then you need to start asking, like, okay, are we putting the right work in? Are we giving ourselves good effort here? Like, we can feel good about that. Now, obviously, every kid's going to have a little bit different message that you need to kind of speak to. So, maybe my instruction wasn't right for that player, and we can talk to the parent about that. Like, this might not be the right place, whether it's the age or the way they want to receive information, things of that nature. But I do think there is a hard conversation that sometimes you need to have with a player if they're not living up to a standard. And we also need to look at ourselves in the mirror, like, did we give them our best effort? But one of the things that we constantly are doing here is evaluating, like, okay, like, we are working on this. Is this the right thing to work on? Did you get better? And if we're not, what else can we consider? And continue to like cycle in on that process. Like, we've decided that we need to work on your fastball command. Your fastball command did not get better with these drills. Is the drill wrong, or am I coaching it wrong? Are you not understanding? And trying to figure out, like, what is the problem in here? And maybe fastball command's not the issue. So it's like continuing to ask the questions over and over of like what we are doing, is it transferring, and then continue to cycle in.
It's something really for all you guys, and then Luke, how do you guys continue to learn as coaches? Because that's an important aspect too, isn't it? Somebody once told me, if you're not getting better, you're getting worse. It's one or the other. You're never staying the same. So how do you challenge yourselves then to continue to evolve as coaches?
So the cool part about being an Indian is the people that we hire are so curious and passionate about development. And so I think the hardest part is filtering the information. So we get so much information so quickly now. It's, well, what do you learn? What book do you stop reading? It's not what books to read. And when you've got a group of men and women that are really passionate about development, there's always the mix of personalities to have the devil's advocate, or you don't run into the groupthink as much because somebody's reading this book or we're learning this, and so it's a big group of highly motivated individuals that are sharing information. And so the beautiful thing about the affiliates and that the stages of development of the players is that we get the opportunity to apply what we're learning. And so whether it's coaching tactics or motor learning principles or whatever the case may be, that we've got an opportunity to say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what we would like to accomplish. Did we accomplish it, yes or no? Do we need to change? And so I think that constant, here's our effort, let's reflect, do we need to adjust and redo it again? I think that's, probably true for business as it is for coaching. And then to answer the earlier question of, how do you meet the players at the different levels and the different stages, I think it's really important that a lot of these questions are first identifying where the player's at. And I think that's why the questioning is so important. We've talked about emotional intelligence a lot this morning. I think the beautiful thing is that they're not going to listen to you until they feel like they're understood. And so when you've asked that question and you're basically, whether it's labeling, mirroring, all the emotional intelligence and negotiating tactics that you can find, and to be honest, there's a ton in like the parenting stuff. It's the exact same thing as coaching. But when you've identified, when you've said, okay, here we go, you're telling me this is where we're at, the player's like, that's it? You're like, okay, here's some data that we have, or here's this, where would you like to go with this? And then, setting those, I think progress coaching with the younger or even the professionals, it's really important to, obviously, like we said before, speak to the heart before the head, but then create some of these short-term victories. So have a clear goal of what we're trying to accomplish. And whether that's, hey, it's moving the bat here, or whatever, you have a clear goal. We lay out the process. We partner with the player on some of the things that we're going to do. And then it's about creating those short-term victories and then having the positive, the positive coaching, the performance psychology, some of those teaching tactics in your tool bag so that when it becomes difficult, we're persistent, we show some of the grit, and we keep moving forward. I think it's really important that, especially at the younger ages where it's more of an instant gratification culture, that they're still learning some of these grit and perseverance type values, that you're really equipped with to help them through it.
You asked about how do we continue to learn, how do our coaches continue to learn. We have a lot of resources, but our coaches are extremely resourceful themselves. So we've had, at any given time, 6, 7, 8 coaches during the season taking online classes about this, whether it be motor control or whether it be sports psychology or whatever it is. And so they're out there. They're always trying to learn. So we're lucky we've built that culture. We've also have a department, learning and development. So Jay Hennessy and Josh Gibson do a tremendous job as far as bringing resources to us as well, exposing us to all sorts of different opportunities, where it's always on top of mind. How can I get better? What resources are out there for me to either read, to be exposed to, what type of experiences, going to different clinics, so we certainly don't feel like we have all the answers and feel like, hey, we're just trying to continue to better ourselves.
I think one of the things that I've really appreciated about this environment too, from a learning standpoint, is that we obviously have a lot of resources in-house, but we don't feel like this is the only place we can go. A lot of our coaches have been open-minded to seek out, so we go to off-season seminars and things of that nature, and it's not limited to just the professional coaches or just the professional administrators. It's, going to the ABCA clinic in, wherever it is in the off-season, so that you're learning from high school and college coaches. You're seeing these are educators and teachers that are coaching baseball at a high school or college level, and they're probably a little bit more disciplined than some of maybe the traditional professional player that became a professional coach without an educational background and maybe learning principles. So I think as an organization, we've valued that, and we've brought a lot more non-traditional baseball people in, and it's kind of continued to filter that conversation and continue to go outside for a lot more help.
Yeah, those are all some great answers, and kind of what we're all talking about up here, and what a lot of people could use, whether they're a coach or whether you're a supervisor in a business. You've got to develop people. You need to develop them as a person. That was in the book. I thought a great job of filling the emotional tank and staying positive. Yet at the same time, you need results. I mean, even people at 9U travel ball want to win to some degree, and then at the professional level, of course, it's very important to win. So how do you balance the development of the person, yet still find a way to get those results on the field or on the court?
Yeah, I'll take this first. So we were talking about earlier, can they trust you and are you competent? That's really what it comes down to. And if you're not getting the results, it needs to be an honest conversation of, okay, we need to course correct here. And I think when you've set a clear goal and, however you want to call it, so something that we use in Lake County, we call it roots and fruits. You can call it lead and lag indicators. You can call it whatever you want. So basically, we think, hey, if you're, whatever it is, we think if your hands are here, this will help you hit the ball better. Okay. And then we'll look in the game, hey, your hands are there. Awesome. That's a root, right? Does it give you the fruit? Are you hitting the ball harder? No. Okay, so it's probably not the hands then. What do you think it is? And you start having these questions and you start going that way. And I think, we've got the resources to measure the fruits. And so the more precise we can be, and then with our experience and using our network of coaching and partnering with the player, we can talk about these different routes, and then we can focus on those. And when you can create change with the roots, you get the fruits. And I think that's where it's really important to say, and to just be honest, like, we got better or we didn't. At the end of the day, we're still taking step forwards to get better.
Yeah, in a lot of ways we try and break that up is into, like, so we have pillars around here where we try and anchor to certain things that we think transfer up the levels. So, and the way we look at it is from a, body standpoint, a ball standpoint, and a performance standpoint. So, like, what is the body doing to impact the ball or the bat, and what is the ball or the bat doing to impact the performance? And that way we can look through the three kind of categories and say, is the body changing? Is the ball changing? Is our performance changing? And then we can see positive or negative amongst those things. And that kind of allows us to say, like, we hypothesize that this change to your delivery or this change to your swing will help do this to the ball and will help do this to, you'll hit the ball harder. So like what Luke was saying. And that allows us to have a tight conversation around the data with the player in the drill to the game. And then that way continue to have a tight feedback loop.
If I could add another thing too, because the pillars are really important, and hopefully I'm not giving away some trade secrets here, but one of the things that we had found is if you were to ask coaches, what's the most important thing about being a great coach, and they would say connecting with the player. If you asked all of our coaches, that's what they would say. And then you ask the players, hey, what's the most important thing about a coach? And they would say, are they getting me better? And so if you've never heard of Doug Lemov, he's a teacher. Check him out. Google him. He's got some really cool stuff. But I think he coined it like connecting through content. And so I think, again, it depends on the level of student or athlete or youth player that you're dealing with. At our level, if your content isn't good, if you're not getting results, they're not going to trust you. I don't care if you're, Mother Teresa and everybody loves you. If you can't get me to throw the ball harder or hit it harder, I don't want to talk to you. And so I think that it really depends on the level, and maybe that's maybe not the greatest analogy there, but I think it's really important to understand we need to connect through content as much as we need to connect through, on an emotional level. And what we really see, and this is where I would say, at the youth level, we have amazing coaches that can connect emotionally with our players and have terrible content. So they are really good at making bad players. And I think it's like, we're dealing with like Twitter and social media, and there's so much information, and these guys are just beautiful marketers, and they're just wonderful at communicating, and then they're making the players worse. And so I think it's important to say, like, yeah, we need to know a little bit of both.
Tricky dynamic for a lot of us to deal with too, because we're getting players from all over, the spectrum, whether it's international or high school or college, and then we're trying to meet the player where they are, but they also have a lot of other voices in their head. So one of the main tenets of, like, when we have a player come into our system, we try and learn a lot about, like, who is influencing them, like, who is giving them the information they're currently working with, and, like, do we know them? Do we have a relationship with them? Because that's going to be a huge issue. Is it their dad? Is it their, uncle? Is it their high school baseball coach? Is it the guy they've paid for lessons for the last 10 years? Because some of this is going to be really hard to undo. So we want to make sure that we have a relationship with that person as well to kind of help bring, like, the feedback in from another direction. And we're not giving them one piece. They're bringing it back to their coach. He's filtering it back into what he wants to say. And then we're not really making any headway, and it's actually hurting the player. So a lot of times what we've tried to do is identify at the end of their first summer with us, where we'll sit down and, we have a 3-day program at the end of their first summer that says, like, okay, here's the roadmap for the off season, from September 1st until, first week of March. Here's what we expect that it will look like. Where are you going to be? Who are you going to be around? Like, what environment are you training in? Who is going to help you? And that way, like, should we reach out and kind of, partner with them on, like, what we think the goal is? Like, all those things to kind of just make sure the message is consistent and it's not being derailed by someone else that we're not aware of.
Yeah, and you've seen it too in your, being with travel ball and then coming over here to the Indians. And I mean, there's a lot of great plans. And the Indians have one of the best I've ever seen organizationally in any profession. How do you then get folks to buy in and for them all to believe, just like getting parents to buy in if you're coaching a youth team to, hey, we're going to stay positive. How do you get them all to get on board?
It's a really tricky question because one of the things that the travel group I was associated with really valued the team aspect of it. So we weren't necessarily like selling ourselves for the best player on the market who wanted to play one tournament with us and then go play another tournament with someone else. So it's almost like we were doing a lot of the basically work up front to know who is the player we're bringing into our travel team, because we want them to be in it for the right reasons and not because we're the shiny object. Now, hopefully we are the shiny object to a certain extent, like we hold ourselves to a certain standard, and then we're going to deliver what we promise in terms of like a good experience. We're going to put a player first. We're going to make right by them. But it's like at the same time we need to do our homework on who is the player that we're bringing into our environment and who is supporting him. Like, are the parents the right fit for our environment? Because the parents are going to drive a lot of the culture around the field as well. So almost like doing your homework on who are the parents and the player that is part of this.
Extremely challenging question that you asked, both about the balance between the winning, and development, that process before, along with this question as far as how do you balance that? Because it is true. I mean, at every single level, it seems like, okay, it's me first. What's going to get me to that next level? What's going to get my son or my daughter to that next level? What organization seems, and you see people jumping around just like Matt was saying. I mean, being transparent right off the get-go about your culture, what you're trying to achieve, number one. We deal with the same thing, to go back to your question before about winning versus the process. I mean, the part of our grit is that team-first approach, which is really hard because you're saying, okay, team-first approach is really good. These guys are in the minor leagues trying to get to the next level, just like somebody in grade school is trying to play for their high school team, to their college team, and so on. So it's a really, individual focus, but then within a team setting. And baseball is probably more like that than most sports. If you're part of a basketball team and you've got a position, you're rotating around, you got to achieve as a team for the most part, unless you got LeBron or somebody like that who can kind of take over a game. But so how do you balance that? And it's really hard. If you don't make it a focus, it won't be a focus. It won't be an emphasis. So doing things every single day, talking about those things. I know Luke does a really good job talking about team-first approach. We do it at all of our affiliates as far as plus-minus meetings, when we just talk about, okay, as a team, whether it be the next day after a game or right after the game, depending on, a lot of times the players decide that, but it's, okay, we're talking about this. What do we do well as a team? What are some things? So it's more about not just one player, but we're learning from each other, and it's about, okay, how do we continue to focus on that team aspect? But again, if you let it slip by the wayside, if you don't make it transparent, if you don't make it a focus, it's not going to be.
And Luke, that's a lot of interesting things that both Alex and Matt had to say there. So as a manager, as a coach, at your level at Lake County, most of the guys that you're going to have are never going to make it to the major leagues. Yet you've got some guys, first-round picks, second-round picks that are expected to. So how do you get everybody moving in the same direction to where those high-round picks, they're expected to go far. Some of the lower kids, they're just trying to hang on. They want to get to that next level, yet you want them to play in the team concept. What are some tactics there to play as a team with so many guys maybe at different levels?
So I think the important thing is, as a manager or coach at that level, we're hoping to move the needle, right? I mean, if we look at the minor league guys, it's less than 3% or less than 1% at low A make it. It would be really cool to make it 2%, like 2 or 3% would be awesome. I think the other part of it is just from a perspective standpoint. I think our coaches have a very positive mindset. So I would say, yeah, maybe there's only 1 or 2 that would make it. I would probably say we've got 6, maybe more. There's just so, you can see it in the players. You're like, wow, if this guy could do this consistently, that plays at the major league level. And then we just don't know. I think it's just really important to say, like, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, as a coach, I'm not here to evaluate necessarily of who gets to the big leagues or who doesn't. It's, how can we get this player better? And I think that's where you start with the buy-in with the players. It's like, how are we going to get better? The other beautiful thing about the Indians and what Tito's done here at the major league level is that they've modeled the way for a lot of our younger guys. So when we talk about team-first approach or grit, routines, all these things, they're modeling it for us, 20 minutes down the road. And I think that that's really important to create a team-first approach and create some of that buy-in with our younger guys, is that, we've got good models, we've got a good windshield of vision in front of us that they can relate to. I think that's where it starts. And then, obviously, we're creating our own culture. I think there's subcultures within every affiliate. And then it's about, just everything that goes with building culture and buy-in and getting them. So whether it's, setting high standards and then just the values that we like that have come from the top with, Chris and Mike and Tito, and then how does that play out and what does that look like at the affiliate? And then trying to build some team cohesiveness. And I think that that's really where the secret sauce is, and it's in that soft stuff that you get some of these, harder results. And whether it's values-based, culture-based, I think when we can all rally around some of these higher standards and, I think just our daily actions, when they become habits, you really start to get the ball rolling. And, buy-in at that point, the players just kind of police themselves with it. And with a lot of turnover, it seems to still kind of carry its weight.
Yeah, I think he hit on one really important thing for our coaches is that, every year we sit down in spring training with everyone there, and we probably have, 70-odd staff members, and we're trying to evaluate 200 players. And we put the rosters on the board, or we do an internal pref list. And one of the things that we realize is that we are really bad evaluators of who is going to be a major leaguer. Every year we look wow, I can't believe I had him in that spot. So one of the things we try and do is not worry about where we think they're going to be, and just assess where they currently are and what we think is going to make them one step better, and really focus in on that piece of it, of the things that we can control with the player and what we think will make them better, and then not worry about oh, that guy's got a chance to be a major leaguer. It's we don't know, so I think that's the hard part.
And I think when we're talking about, what can make that one's next step for each player, there's steps like that for team things. And so when we're trying to create buy-in as a team or function as a unit, I think that there are just team standards, and we've read about them in some, in the book and stuff, whether it's, Frank Kona's huge on base running. That's a team mentality. If you see Frankie running hard down to first base, that's a mindset. That's a culture there. That's a team. It kind of that builds the team culture. Where, I don't know that if he runs 0.05 of a second faster to first base, that it's really going to be a huge stepping stone for him to be the next caliber of player. But it does wonders for team stuff.
It's a great way to put it too. Absolutely. So. We've got about 15 minutes or so left here. We're going to open it up to questions from you in the audience. I think Coach Blade's got a microphone, so any questions for any of the guys here, feel free to get Coach Blade's attention, and we'll get some up here from some of the questions from you in the audience. So what do we have here? Got some hands over that way.
I want to talk about the three pitchers that have come up from AA. What has made them make that big jump? I mean, you take somebody from AA and come up here and been successful like that. I mean, what is it in their makeup that made them jump over the guys that were maybe a little bit older, a little bit more established?
It's just great coaching.
Especially at Lake County, first of all, right?
Yeah. I think those three in particular are pretty interesting, and it was, one of the early phases of our, the way we changed our scouting and evaluation system to really value the players makeup and basically foundation more than just the talent and the tools they have. And the three pitchers in particular all have, interesting backgrounds. Shane Bieber was a really accomplished college strike thrower who had some traits in the delivery and within his personality that he thought, like, we're going to fit our system well. And then, we didn't think that Shane Bieber was going to be, in the All-Star game, 3 years after being drafted, but we knew that he had a chance to get better, and that's a bet we'll take. And when we work in probabilities, Aaron Savali is a very cerebral kid who has a wide pitch mix, and traditionally, we might have hampered that kid by taking away, his cutter or his slider and focusing on 2 or 3 pitches. One of the things that I thought was funny was when he came up and pitched the first game, Tito talked after about like how poised he was and his ability to pitch to a plan and use his breaking ball and his secondary pitches, which is uncanny for our rookie. And it's like, well, we were actually, when he was in his rookie year of being drafted, thinking about like, do we simplify his mix and get him to use his fastball more, which would be a traditional process of like getting fastball command before we go to secondary, before we do like pitch plans, things like that. And we've kind of flipped that a little bit in our development system in terms of taking what the player has as his core foundation of like his tool set and trying to optimize that. So if he's a really good breaking ball pitcher, we want him to be a really good breaking ball pitcher and develop the fastball along the way, where typically we would have said, oh, he's a really good breaking ball pitcher, let's make him use his fastball a lot, and that would be almost like holding him back. So these guys have moved really quickly because we've almost like played more to their strengths and selected for some of the learning traits that we've kind of found to be valuable.
One of the things that like I think would go right along with Matt saying there is, and it's certainly not us here, and I was joking about our coaching, but as I thought about it kind of more, I was like, the way that these guys own their process and the way that they own what they're doing and how confident they are, think about that if you're a teacher or you're a coach, and that you've been either get out of the way, which is a huge thing that we could do, right? It's just sometimes we just need to get out of the way. Or when you are coaching, are we coaching in a way that empowers them? And I think that's something like that our pitching department has done really well. If you look at our coaches in there, is that, they've equipped, like Plesac and Bieber. And I'm not as familiar with Bieber, but, with Plesac and Savali, I have some pretty firsthand on experience with. And it's like, obviously these were very highly motivated players to begin with. They had a lot of the grit that we're talking about. But at the same time, it was, our coaches, I felt like they did a really good job with those guys of empowering them so that when they hit that mound, one, they feel very comfortable. I would say enough of the competitiveness to know like, hey, I need to get better here. And so I think you look at all those 3 guys, I would say the biggest separator, obviously they have really good stuff, but it's right here. And they've got that extra whatever it is up top that allows them to perform.
Yeah, and they have all done it in kind of different ways. Obviously, Shane emerged first, sometimes by chance, opportunity presented itself for him. Aaron and Zach have both dealt with injuries over the last couple of years to kind of like keep them off the field and slow them down. But I do think that the way we've tried to solve for what major league performance is and where the state of the game is, and then tried to bring that down level to level and say like, okay, do we think this guy has a chance to be a major league contributor with what he's currently doing, and then try and basically level up like his strengths or optimize or focus on those first, and then just kind of like continue to bring up the weaknesses, but not necessarily like focus on the weaknesses.
All right.
Morning.
Who's next? Here we go.
When it comes to your top players who are not just top because of their talent, but also because of their leadership skills, are there commonalities from their support systems as they came up the ranks? And if there are commonalities in those support systems, what were they?
Yeah, I think parenting is probably the biggest one. If I look at, some of the players that have come through the minor league system that show some of the leadership qualities that, one, research would say that it's really good, but 2, that it applies to good performance and, some of that synergy. The commonalities that you would think, whether it's trait-based, whether it's humility, or the positive energy, and getting to meet some of their support group, it's been like their support group's like really good. And so I think parenting probably has a huge part to do with that. I would say their experience with coaching probably has a huge part to do with that. So more so than others, I think the humility of the team first approach is probably the biggest one.
Yeah, we have players from all different backgrounds. You talk about some of our Latin players, and they probably don't have a great support system. Somewhere as far as parenting, I'm thinking of one player in particular who comes from a pretty rough background, but he's such a good team-first approach. So whether he had some support system along the way or that sense of belonging, but he's taken ownership on that leadership. So, man, I wish there was a magic pill or there was a secret formula to capture all those guys. But I mean, as far as once we get them, trying to embrace them in our culture and try to support them as much as we possibly can as well. I mean, that's part of our job also.
Well, one of the things that I found interesting in being around a couple draft processes now is, like, obviously we can spend a lot more time on the best players in the country and learning about them. And I think that's where the makeup part of it is so important, that like those will be our influencers. Like they'll drive a lot of our processes and our culture. And then also not necessarily when we look at these guys saying like, is this like the perfect person? Like everyone's going to have their hickeys. It's like, do we know what the hickey is? Or do we know, like, if a kid comes from a bad environment, is he a bad apple or is he a product of the circumstances he's in? And if we take him out of that environment and put him in ours, will he succeed? So I think one of the things we've tried to separate is like, is he a bad person or is he a product of the circumstances he's currently in, and try and differentiate those? Because I think sometimes we label a kid like he's not going to be a good makeup person in our system because, what I currently see. And it's like, well, that's not exactly true. Like we've brought a lot of players in from a tough background who thrive in our system. So I think it's being aware of that.
How are you guys, because that's really tough, how are you able to separate from, okay, good kid, just coming from a tough place, or maybe a kid that's going to be really difficult, is he worth it? I mean, how do you go through those processes?
And Brad's in this here. He's been instrumental in kind of building this, but one of the things we do is, not talk to just the player or just watch the game. It's, doing our due diligence on what does the coach think of him? What do his teammates think of him? What does his guidance counselor think of him? What do opponents think of him? Like you'll start to get this full perspective of the player, and then not just ask softball questions when we get a chance to engage these people. Like find ways to get like actionable behavioral questions that we can see, like what has this person done in different instances or in different environments, or if we're talking about a kid from Miami that goes to play for Team USA, like maybe he doesn't have the best instruction in Miami, but when he came to Team USA, he was wide open and willing to listen. Like taking him and putting him in different environments, you're going to get different shades of that person, and maybe we can capitalize on some of that.
And then the other aspect to that Matt already mentioned was understanding who he is coming in. And so you can meet it head on. You can obviously coach him differently or embrace him differently, but also understanding that we feel like our culture is so strong that if he does act the other way or revert back to some of those patterns, that he's going to be the outlier. He's going to notice that he's not necessarily the guy who's fitting in compared to the rest of the culture that we build, and we have found that that's been a major influencer as well.
All right. Next up, what do we have? Some over there.
Good morning, thanks. You talk a lot about culture and team and all that stuff, and clearly that's important. We've seen that with the success under Tito. At the same time, it's a business, and you're trading away people. So especially for you, Coach, I'm wondering, do players ever come to you and say, hey, Coach, I hear all this talk about team and culture, and at the same time, you just traded my brother. How do you deal with that for players?
Yeah, that's tough. We just... So one of the players that was in Lake County, Ruben Cardenas, we traded to Tampa for some awesome major league players. And it's difficult. It changes the dynamic of the clubhouse. And there is, I think, when Eck was talking about and Matt was talking about transparency and meeting people head on with the nature of the business, I think it's really important to just talk about those elephants in the room if that's the case. I mean, and I think that they go parallel with the culture. I mean, there's no, at the end of the day, if you can hit 40 home runs, you're going to make a lot of money. You might not make it for the Indians, but somebody's going to pay you a lot of money if you hit 40 home runs a year. And so I think it really starts from Chris and Mike. And so even though it's a business, there'll be players, and Brad could speak more on this, but I got to sit in the draft room a few years ago, and we just took a guy off the board. I mean, he was a top 10, you know what, this guy wouldn't fit for us. We're just going to take him off. We're not even going to think about drafting that guy. And so, there is a yes and to everything. So having a conversation is difficult sometimes when you're trading away a family member, or you're releasing a family member. I think there is a definite, okay, we need to have a conversation about it. But that there's such a good support group that we know together we perform better. And, just having the conversation around that really helps.
Yeah, I do think that the transparency is really key, and having very clear, difficult conversations with players about the realistic opportunity in front of them, if it's a release situation or a demotion situation, and explain to them why we view them in this way, whether it's because of the things we've agreed upon and they're not living up to, or we're not seeing progress and just time has run out. Those are difficult conversations, but it's not about we don't like you anymore. It is here is the circumstance, here is the situation. Obviously, we have like you said, a business to run, and that is real. So at the major league level, we are solving for wins. So we have to make that team competitive, and in doing that, we might have to trade players we really like at the minor league level. So we always explain to them you're not just playing for us, you're playing for 29 other teams. So we highly recommend you give your best effort all the time, because it's not just us that are evaluating you. If you want a chance to keep playing this game for a long time, the other teams are also watching.
I think if the relationships that we built with those players were just business, the culture would fall apart. But the relationship's a little bit deeper, and even if we trade that player away, and Ruben Cardenas that Luke mentioned, really good player that we all like, we all still want the best for Ruben Cardenas in his career, in his interests, whatever it is. He still communicates with the coaches that he's built that relationship
the other day
with. Yeah, no question. So those relationships are still going to continue on. You're not just seeing him as an asset and saying, okay, we're just going to move him along. You really want the best for the player.
All right. Do we have one more over here, I think, on this side? Somebody was over here.
Thank you. It seems like the Indians organization also has extraordinary patience with player development. It's fascinating to me. In the World Series in 2016, and I think of players like Tyler Naquin and Roberto Perez, who back then we were wondering if these guys are even going to make it. And now here they are, incredible key parts of what's going on with the Indians this year. I didn't see that coming, but clearly you guys had faith in players like that, and now it's really paying off. How does that look like behind the scenes?
So Matt talked about the process already, and about we're not very good evaluators. We say it all the time, so it's about assessing. We don't know which guy's going to turn into that next Roberto Perez or that Tyler Naquin. Roberto Perez, his background, he had never really hit. Through the lower levels of the minor leagues, he was defense first catcher. I mean, that's what he was. He didn't like to hit. He would stay away from the cage. He would stay away from extra batting practice because it wasn't something that he was good at. And it was continuing, awareness of where he was at, assess where he's at, keep nudging. All of a sudden he starts having a little bit of success that turns into, okay success. And all of a sudden now he's hitting opposite field home runs and doing some things in the minor leagues, and that belief. But again, we don't know which guy's going to turn and who's going to impact that big league. So let's assess every single player where they're at and continue to try to provide them resources and direction and guide them to continue to make strides, even little by little, making them better. Because honestly, that's how we're going to win as an organization here. It's going to be through really good scouting, really good player development, and making sure that that 1%, that 2%, hopefully turns into 4%, 5% of our guys getting to the big leagues and making an impact.
The other part behind the scenes that is really cool, I think our our leadership does an excellent job of listening to others. And so, might sound weird, but they try to hire, we try to have all these good people, and then it's like, well, what's the point if we don't listen to them? And I think they've done a really good job of listening. I think there was definitely people that thought Tyler and Roberto were going to be the players that they are right now. And it certainly wasn't all of us, but there were definitely coaches and scouts and front office personnel that were like, hey, this guy could be pretty good. And if you're looking at it from a business standpoint, you want to keep as many of those good assets as you can on board for as long as you can. And that's the beautiful thing about the minor leagues, is that you've got this drawn out process to get to the major leagues, but it also gives us an opportunity to keep our talent as much as we can. And credit to Tyler and Roberto for the perseverance, and credit to our major league staff to keep those guys mentally engaged. I've been sent down from the major leagues and played in AAA, and it's tough mentally to deal with that when you feel like, I just need a shot. I just need, a month, and you don't get it for whatever circumstances. And, for Tyler especially, who's maybe had a little bit more rougher path than Roberto, for Tyler to be able to still get out there and compete and show that positive energy says a lot to him and the coaching staff.
Very good. Okay. How are we doing? Time? Good? Okay. Very good. Yep. All right, Ryan, you ready? Yeah.
First of all, let's give a round of applause to these guys, please. That was, I don't know about you guys, but I could listen to this stuff all day. I think as you listen to them speak, there's so many times they obviously reference baseball on the field of play. It's the exact same thing in our offices, right? They talked a lot about the one big thing that I really pulled from this, that was overarching theme, is really the results are simply the outcome of the process, right? They're not tunnel vision focused on just results. It's a process, and they're developing these young players, and we can do that in our workplace environments on a day-to-day basis. It's the exact same thing. The way you focus on process is growth mindset, right? Developing relationships. Coach Blade hit on developing the mind, the body, and the spirit. Relationships are really about trust and confidence, and the Indians organization does it at probably the best level out of any Major League Baseball organization in the league, and they're in our own backyard. So I hope you guys learned a lot from these guys. They will be available. I'll get to that here in a minute, but I just want to quickly transition, give you a little bit more information about PCA and what we're trying to do here in Cleveland. Our programming is really centered around three simple concepts. How do you make yourself better? How do you make your teammates better? And how do you honor the game in the process? Okay, and again, when you look at real life scenarios, that directly translates. How do you make yourself better? Well, you want to be better in the office, right? We know kids are only going to play, even at the highest possible level, on average, 2 to 5 years, depending on the sport. So by the time these kids are 25, 26 years old, even if they played at the highest level of sport, which is only, 2% of all college athletes that have a chance to play professionally. So if all we're focused on is results from a field of play standpoint, we're missing the boat completely in the development of our kids. We can't be focused on the high school level. We can't be focused on the 6% of athletes that go on to play collegiately, because then we're forgetting about the 94%, right? And the best part about it is when you develop and focus on the 94%, the 6% get better, because they're the ones that have that elevated mindset that these guys just addressed. So that's really what our organization, I know Neil hit on it earlier, when sports are done right and we're motivating these kids intrinsically at the highest possible level, they're going to be good. And the outcome, wins, collegiate scholarships, whatever it may be, will come as a process. This whole mindset is why I'm here. So I obviously work for PCA, but I work for PCA not because it's a job. I work for it because it's my passion. It's what I believe in. I was a former collegiate student athlete. I worked 10 years in the collegiate athletics administration. A lot of what I was seeing at the collegiate level was the mental stability and self-awareness of our student athletes. It was going the wrong way. And when I started talking to the NCAA and started talking to some great athletic administrators about it, I asked a lot about, when these kids are becoming collegiate student athletes, it's not all of a sudden they're hitting this mental block, right? It's not all of a sudden these intrinsic motivations and self-awareness are just starting because they became a college athlete. So I asked, what are we doing to try to get ahead of it? What are we doing in the high school space? What are we doing even before that at the youth space? Because that's where it all starts. And it starts with people like you in the room who are coaches, who are parents, who are administrators that are supporting these kids. And so I'm very fortunate that day to day, I get to work with amazing people like you, amazing people like these guys, to help create this environment for these kids where we can support their best possible personal performance that will translate into all aspects of their life. I started this role because I thought I could help. What's been amazing is it's actually helped me more than I've even helped it. I've learned so much about myself in the last year through PCA, through the philosophies, through the relationships that I've had. And I'm very blessed that every single day I get to work with amazing board members like Patty and Neil and Brad, and I can go on, and we've got 3 different tiers of involvement of just selfless leaders who understand clearly the importance of athletics as a developmental tool for kids, right? Sports is not extracurricular. Sports are co-curricular. They teach these life lessons and amplify them outside of the classroom better than any other level that we can get to. And so I know there's a lot of current partners in the room. I just want to say thank you. You guys are who we're trying to serve. I would ask that if there's opportunities to connect us in the youth sports environment, if you're a high school and we can help build some of the youth sports environment in your area to develop this mindset so that when they get to you guys, all of a sudden we can just turn up the heat and move them to the next level, as opposed to introduce them to a lot of these philosophies. That's really what we're here to do. We're here to help organizations do sports right. And that growth mindset, these guys mentioned it earlier, their coaches in the middle of the season are going to get additional resources. That's incredible. Their highest level, they know more about the game of baseball than probably any of us in this room combined, and they're still looking to grow and improve because they're all about meeting their players where they are as opposed to my way or the highway type style. And that's what we're really trying to grow. So just want to thank again, obviously, our amazing sponsors, Sports Time Ohio, Fox Sports Ohio, Enterprise Holdings, University Hospitals, the Indians, Dixon Eaton for doing a lot of the video stuff today. These organizations believe in what we're doing, and we really need to turn up the heat. And that's, if you look, Neil mentioned it early on, in front of you are those cards. If you could take a moment to fill out those cards and either indicate your personal desire to get involved in an organization, whether it's from a personal standpoint, between time, talent, or treasure, or if your company has an interest in utilizing athletics as an educational vehicle to improve our kids, we would love to be able to work with you guys in some capacity. The other thing, we're going to actually collect all of those because those will be the drawings for the incredible prizes that we have at the back. So we have a lot of autographed bats, we have some autographed balls, we have some amazing PCA books because they're the same level, but if anybody indicates a personal contribution on that form, you'll be entered into the draw to win one of those items. And we're going to draw that here in a minute. So Stan and Rachel, if you guys can go ahead and collect those, so you'll see them come around to the box. If you can gather them at your table and hand them over, that'll help make things go a little quicker. While they're doing that, we are very, very fortunate to have kind of a special surprise for you guys that, for those of you that are able to stick around and take advantage of it, thanks to the Indians, they're going to allow us to go down on the field. They're going to allow us to go in one of the dugouts and have kind of a more one-on-one conversation with these guys. So not everybody gets to go on the field, but for our appreciation for what you guys do for the youth in our communities, who are really our future, we wanted to kind of go that extra level and allow you guys to take advantage of that opportunity. So feel free when we finish up here, there's some event staff that'll help get you down on the field, some of the fan experience team from the Indians. So definitely take advantage of that. As they're still going around collecting these forms, just want to, again, appreciate you guys very, very much. Those who are already involved, those who will be involved after this event. I hope you guys, if anybody that makes a contribution today, if you want to process your card right away, we'll be able to do that at this backdrop. Otherwise, I'll make sure to reach out to you with some credit card information for online payment or a check as well, where to send those. But greatly appreciate, again, all the support that you guys provide. And as soon as they're done here, we'll go through the drawing. Thank you.